Hey folks, welcome to The View, a one-off late night live stream, 5:30 on a Friday. And as you can see, I am joined by Gerry McDermott, hotly requested Gerry McDermott over the course of this week. Gerry, the more I asked, should we do something on the academy and talk to Gerry, the more people said, yeah, let's talk to Gerry, let's get Gerry in. So here we are. Gerry, how are things? And thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure, Ger. And first of all, I want to compliment you on your fantastic show. It's really, really terrific, and it's great for Irish supporters. And doing well, and looking forward to this evening's chat.
Good. Yeah, and we'll have a chat. This is going to be the focus of
Yep.
tonight is going to be a back and forth chat. So, and there are a few people floating around in chat. We'll try and get to as many people in chat as we can, Tread. But if it's kind of flowing and going a nice way, I don't want to interrupt it. So if I don't get to everyone's comments throughout the show, don't worry about it. We'll try and get as many as we can in. So usual people floating around. Kimberly is there. How you doing, Kimberly? Looking forward to this. Clive is in. Mike is there as well. Getting as bad as Joe. Not as many as Joe, but we're getting there. We got Strippers there. A up has things. Nipper's in the house. Good evening, Nipper. Alison is there as well. Hello, Alison. How are you doing? Clive, I've been watching the Leeds youths and women's teams for years. Very important part of the club. Hugely important part of the club. It's our future. We've got nothing without the youths. Yeah, there we go. So a few people floating around in chat. I won't ask anybody to go and like anything right now because you haven't seen anything yet. And if you haven't seen it, then you don't know if you like it or not. So if you like it towards the end of the stream, feel free to like it and subscribe and all that kind of stuff, and we'll get that out of the way. So first things first, Gerry. I've been chatting to you on and off over the years. I think you had a nice relationship.
That's correct, and I knew your dad very well.
Yeah, my dad loved chatting to you. He really, really did. And we've kept in touch a little bit over the years as well. So my connection to you is pretty strong, and I'm delighted to have that connection with you. But your connection with Leeds is pretty strong as well. So talk to us about your connection with Leeds United.
Well, initially I set up a Leeds United supporters club. We were the first supporters club back in the 80s in Ireland, in Galway, obviously, where I come from. And it's actually 40 years this summer, about 5 years into my reign as the secretary of supporters club, something came into my head, and I just thought, we don't get many Irish kids to Leeds, and the only one at that stage, and I think it was more by luck than anything else, was Dennis Irwin, who came from a club called Everton in Cork and had signed for Leeds in '83 and had a phenomenal career. And then one day I just took the initiative. I wrote a letter. I'd already been on to previous to Dave Blakey, who was the chief scout under Billy Bremner, and we missed out on another Cork man there, Roy. We could have had him in around '86 when he was 15-year-old kid trialing with Ireland, and we missed out on him. So I says, we're missing out on too many good kids. It was a phenomenal time for Irish football and young players coming through. So what I decided, I wrote a letter, and about 3-4 weeks after I wrote that letter, I got a letter back from a gentleman called Eddie Beaglehole, who was the youth development officer at Leeds United at the time, an absolute gentleman. And we started to get to know one another. Back then, it was a question of ringing each other. And then he says, I think it's a very, very good idea. And we built on it from there. And I mean, we all know what happened after that. Gary Kelly went over, phenomenal career, followed by his relation, Ian Hart, and then Stephen McPhail, Alan Mabry. Now there was other ones like Alan Mahan who didn't come through, and but that's football. Gary Dicker, who's still in football at Brighton, and they all went over there, and we started getting a good flow of kids going over there. And I mean, look at the return throughout the 90s. 4 players that went on. People forget these 4 players went on and featured in the UEFA Cup as it was then, and then the Champions League, played in European semi-finals. I mean, what an achievement, and it was fantastic. Unfortunately, then I finished up around the end of the 90s, was during when Dave O'Leary was manager, and then obviously the club went into decline shortly afterwards. We went into the noughties, and then obviously since then they haven't really had a scout working in Ireland. And the last young player that actually went from Ireland and had a successful career at Leeds was Stephen McPhail in '95. And that's too long, but it's the way football is. And I think I mentioned to you earlier, it's changed now. It's all database, and And to be fair, nobody has a better database than Leeds United. And, but the one thing a database doesn't tell you about a player is their personality. And I
No.
always believed we used to have four ingredients we looked for in a player: speed, intelligence, technical ability, and the one that we always felt was most important was their personality. And by that I mean attitude, and how they coped in all sorts of situations, the good times, the bad times, the in-between times. So that's basically my introduction to Leeds and the Leeds Academy. Then I I I, I I got involved with Leeds when Jason Blunt was there, a very good pal, and he was involved, and
Yeah.
Andy Wood, who's been there over 20 years.
Yeah.
One of the great, to me, one of the great people in football, and we're lucky to have such a guy. And we brought them over to Galway, the Galway Cup, and through my involvement with that, we managed to, unearth a few other great talents like Charlie Cresswell and Jack Clark, who's now at Sunderland, Niall Huggins, who's gone to Sunderland, and Ollie Casey, who's, is playing in League One now. But they all did well, and great careers, and fair play to them.
Niall Huggins, who I watched during the week playing against Leeds under
Yeah, it
21s,
was his
and had a
first
really
time, I
good
think,
game.
playing against the 21.
Yeah.
A lovely kid, very unlucky with injuries. But I mean, we forget Bielsa played him against Arsenal in
He
the
did. Saw
Premier
something in
League,
him.
and he was
Yeah.
probably one of our best players. Yeah.
It's a big thing. You mentioned attitude, and we talked to Brian McDermott about scouting a couple of weeks ago, and he says number one thing that they look for, and as you said, it's the one thing you just don't see in data, the attitude of a kid. I've coached some very talented young people, and I've coached some people who maybe weren't as talented but had better attitudes. And you kind of look at it, well, I'll spend the time on the kids with the better attitude because they'll learn, they'll listen, they'll develop. Sometimes the more talented kids, if the attitude isn't there, it can actually stunt their development, and they just don't get maybe enough time, or they go the wrong direction, and it can be problematic for them. It's when you were looking at kids, you mentioned attitude. How big was the conversations that you had with Leeds when recommending players to them about players' attitudes?
Yeah, attitude to me is so important. And what I mean is, like, you look at, say, for a player like Gary Kelly. Gary Kelly will play anywhere in a Leeds shirt.
Yeah.
And, it's so important in football, Ger. Very important,
Yeah, I said we do it with work with stuff, and like Chris Smith, the guy that I work with, and we work off a model called KSA. It's knowledge, skills, and attitude. Knowledge you'll learn, skills you can be taught, but attitude is all you. And if you don't bring attitude to the table, the knowledge and the skill don't matter because it will impact them in a negative way. So it's hugely important. You mentioned a lot of people there. There was a guy, that I remember at Leeds, another Irish player called Damien Lynch, who went from Bows, I think, somebody else over to Leeds and then back to Bows. And I was unlucky enough. He was a right back. I was unlucky enough to play against him when he came back to Ireland. And I was shocked that he wasn't still over there because I was playing on the wing at the time. He absolutely destroyed me. But he destroyed everybody he played against. He was a talented player. But again, unfortunately for him, struggled with injuries. That seemed to be a problem at the club at the time. A lot of young players were getting to an area where you think this is the next step. And then injuries would stop them. Stephen McPhail, you mentioned. Has there been a more gifted young Irish player that didn't make it at Leeds properly?
No, Stephen McPhail was phenomenal. Stephen just lacked that half a yard of pace, and there's no doubt about it. If he had worked on that from an earlier age, and I don't want to be critical of Stephen McPhail because lovely lad, great ability on the ball. He could execute a pass at 12 years of age that kids would never even see, who were probably 3, 4, 5 years older.
Yeah.
He would have been the next Liam Brady. He could have played on any stage in any country in the world. He was that good. I mean, we all remember that unbelievable pass he put through for Hasselbank against Derby County at the baseball ground. There was the 2 goals he scored at Stamford Bridge. But Stephen was he was just a hugely talented player. But just to go back to Damien Lynch, people forget we won the U Cup as well in the 90s, in 93 and also in 97, and quite a number of Irish boys featured in that team in 97. And Damien played alongside Jonathan Woodgate, and we all know what Woody went on and achieved. Yeah. But think back then, and I'm talking about when they were playing in their youth side, there wasn't a great deal of difference between the two. And yeah, Damien, another lovely lad. I mean, one thing I will say about all the Irish players I've mentioned, and that would come back to your attitude and personality. They were up for the crack, as all Irish guys are, and like to laugh, but they were tremendous kids, great ambassadors for the clubs they came from, mainly Home Farm, St. Kevin's. Another one we actually missed out on in '95 was Robbie Keane, and he'd been over there with two other boys from Crumlin. So, but you'll always get that, you'll always miss out on one or two. But again, um, going back to Stephen McPhail, I mean, he just had it, and it's just a pity he underachieved, not just for Leeds United but Irish football. He
Yeah.
could have been and would have been the next Liam Brady, and he would have been part of that success story of Irish football in the '90s as well, for not just for Jack Charlton's time, but Mick McCarthy and the subsequent successors.
Mm.
And it's just one of those stories that just didn't happen, you know.
Yeah. I laugh when people talk about Robbie Keane as a youth. I knew Robbie's family. I
Yeah,
knew Robbie a bit. I lived in Jobstown in Tallaght, and Robbie lived in Brookfield in
yeah.
Tallaght. And his brother Graham was managing, or was involved with
Mm,
Brookfield Celtic when I was kicking around as a kid, and I went and played for them for a bit. And Robbie, who wasn't supposed to be playing for Brookfield because he was supposed to be over in Wolves as a youth player, but
yeah.
he would go home, would play for Brookfield as a banger. But we played a couple of games together, and just an incredible, talented footballer. And I remember walking home from one of our games with my dad, and he said, "I don't get what all the fuss about Robbie is. I just don't see it." And I used to love joking with him before he passed away. And as we got older, I used to love joking about him, saying, "Jesus, remember when you didn't think Ireland's all-time leading goal scorer wasn't up to
Mm.
it? I wouldn't make it." So but a great
The,
kid, great attitude. His brother,
the one
Graham,
thing I will
as
say,
well.
and I include Roy Keane in this and Robbie, is that we sometimes judge players on their size and physicality.
Yeah, you do.
So I go back to Roy, who I initially knew in the mid '80s, when he was playing with a club called Mayfield in Cork, and Robbie, and is that they were tiny. They were actually
They were
tiny
small.
little players. And people would not have recognized their talent and what they were going to achieve later on. But remember one thing, and I've always said this about scouting, is that when you're looking at a kid, you're looking at potential. You're not going to
Oh yeah,
see the finished article in a 15-year-old. And you also got to remember, you're not looking at him as a 15-year-old. You're looking, what could he be at 20 years of age when he fills into a man's body and
yeah.
grows? And that's where a lot of scouts miss out on. They go for the bigger, stronger lad at 15 and ignore the little ones. And the
Mm.
amount of players, Robbie was sent back from Leeds in '95 because he was too small. And I think about it, like he was very small and light, but
Mm.
you could see the talent in him. And I always had that thing in the back of my head, as particularly association football. Unlike other sports, it's not rugby, it's not Gaelic games.
Mm.
Little guys are just as important. I mean, the great footballers, you look at Johnny Giles, Billy Bremner, Bobby Collins, you look at Lionel Messi,
Yeah, Messi.
some of
Yes.
the great footballers in world football. Pele wasn't a very big man.
No.
They've all been relatively small and probably would not have played it and featured in any other sports. But association football is the one thing it does. It brings in, embraces every type of player,
Mm.
size, etc. So um, size is a big factor with me, and still is. That yeah, and even that's one thing I like about the Leeds players now at the moment. That we have some small lads in there. They're
You do.
not that big. I mean, Nanto, who's probably has been arguably our best player this season since he came in January. He's only 5'4",
Yeah.
and a lot of clubs would look at him and say, "Oh, he's too small,"
Yeah.
you know. But look at the impact. Look what he's done at Leeds United since he's come in. You know.
Looked at him last night. Jesus, he gave Kyle
Yeah.
Walker an awful time. That's a
Yeah, there, and
very experienced player.
it's because he's balanced. He's got that bit of power. He's got pace, etc. And the other
Mm.
one that people are comparing the two, but give him a little bit of time. He's going to fill out. He's going to still get bigger and more powerful. Is Crescencio
Yeah.
Somerville? He's a little bit lighter build and things like that, but he's got the skill. I always say with football, if you have the skills, start with that, and don't worry about their size. That will come in time, and you can always get working on them in the gym. And these people in clubs now, they'll do that for them, But look at their skill levels first. What they bring, the skill set.
So many people last night said, "Can't believe Willie Gnonto's playing for Leeds. How did that even
Yeah.
happen? How did he end up there? How did Inter Milan let him go?" And you wonder, have clubs looked at him and gone, "Too small, moved on," and just moved on, just being dismissive. And as you mentioned so many players there, Lionel Messi, one of the best players of all time.
Yeah.
Tiny, even though the Premier League now, Tony Cruz wasn't a big guy either when he was in Germany as well.
Yeah.
Amazing player. Alexis McAllister, Brighton World Cup winner now as well, not a big guy either. So it's not. Size isn't the measure of the footballer.
Tyler Adams is not that.
Tyler Adams is not a big guy at all.
Well, what a player, and pound for pound.
10 years ago, Gerry.
What about David Batty? David Batty was, I'd say, about 5'7", and pound for pound. If you looked at David Batty, if somebody can get an old picture of David Batty as a 15-year-old and look at him, oh my God, he looked about 11, and he was playing under 15 football, and probably a lot of clubs would have looked at him at that stage, or if it was in today's market and you were sending a video of him or whatever, they'd look at him and say, no, he's too small. No, he wouldn't fit into our team, or he wouldn't fit into our academy. But what a player. I mean, I'm sure a lot of your listeners out there, and you're thinking through Leeds Academy and what came through. I would say a lot of your viewers would be saying David Batty would have been one of the greats.
Absolutely. Yep. Both stints at Leeds. It's a shame that he went away for a while. You said pound for pound. For me, one of the best tacklers you'll see in the game, and at a time when meaty tackles were part of the game, he was one of the best.
More than, and don't forget, I always believe our most successful periods, been involved in winning trophies and being involved in the latter stages of European competitions is when we've had a great midfield. And going back to Stephen, like he had David Batty alongside him, he had Oliver Decor, and before that, the team that won it in '92. Look at that midfield. David was in there with Gary McAllister, and you had Speedo on the left, and of course another little man, Gordon Strachan. So again, you're talking about size. I mean, look at the size of Gordon Strachan, but I mean, a giant in every respect apart from his physical side,
Great footballers, though. All great footballers. A lot of people in the chat mentioning stuff. I'm trying to throw as much up on the screen as I can. We had a little chat off air, Gerry, about Brendan Aronson. And more so that you get a bit of stick from a portion of the fans that personally I don't think is merited. I know his performances haven't been perfect all season, but for me, there's a talented player in there, and he's only 22 years of age, as we were talking about. You mentioned him, so I wanted to give you a minute to talk about Brendan Aronson for a second. Your thoughts on him?
The one thing he's got to work on is his decision making. He's fantastic balance, turn of pace, and he can get into spaces. And that's not easy. People say, well, it takes a little bit of intelligence to work out, especially in the Premier League. The one thing he does, and we all know, he holds onto the ball too long. Yeah. Yes, he's slightly built and gets knocked off the ball, but that'll come. You'll be surprised when you look at Aronson. He's still only 22 and turned 22 not that long ago.
Recently,
wait till you see him at 25. But the other thing he's got to just get into his game is when to play other players in, when to play that pass. Timing is huge in football. Massive. And a second can determine whether a team scores or don't score. But I think that'll come. I think he's playing. It's a big step from the Austrian League at Salzburg to the Premier League with Leeds United. And remember, give him this first season and let him find his feet. But he'll come good. I'm 100% sure. Yeah. Don't judge him now. Wait till he's 25, and then if he hasn't moved on from then, well, then you kind of say, I was right about him. But we make too many early decisions on players. And I think, just think about it. How many 22-year-olds has played at the highest level in football? And what I mean by the highest level of football, that's what the Premier League is today. It's the highest level in the world. There's the Bundesliga maybe a few years ago, but the Bundesliga has fallen off. La Liga has fallen off. Serie A has fallen off. The Premier League is where all the top players. So when you're in there and you're playing against the best, you have to be on top of your game every game. And when you're a young lad, you will have those inconsistencies. You will have good days, bad days. once he becomes a little bit more consistent, once he learns a bit more about the game, and it's a learning process for him. He's, as I said, he's still only 22, and once he learns about um, how to use the ball, decision making, etc., because he has the balance, he has the
Yeah.
skills, he has the awareness, he can get in behind defenders,
Yeah.
and he can find those spaces, and he can get into the box and create opportunities. All he has to do is knit them all together with those final decisions and when to play the ball off or when
Yeah.
to hold it.
And that comes with time, as you said. I mean, one of the biggest
Mm,
criticisms I have of Jack Harrison, who's a far more experienced player, is sometimes he
mm,
doesn't release the ball quick enough. He holds onto it that second or
yeah,
two too long. And decision making is probably been
yeah,
Leeds' biggest weakness this season, has been decision making in the
mm,
final third. And that's from experienced players as well as young players as well. So that's something that comes with time and experience and learning. The more you play, the more coaches
yeah.
he plays under, the more he'll learn and pick up from other people. And I think he's in the right place to do it. I think he'd be a cracking player for Leeds in the next couple of seasons. I think,
I
again,
think the one player we've not replaced and
I love
is Pablo.
Pablo, yeah.
Pablo had everything, but I know going back to the younger players, I remember Ollie Casey telling me when you're playing in the rondos in training with Pablo, and the demands, and he said he didn't look at you as Ollie would have been then 17, 18-year old.
Mhm.
He didn't kind of look, oh, you're only a kid. He demanded these you be on top of your game, even in training. And it was the presence he had on the field, presence he had up at Thorpe Arch in training, and every club, every top side needs a Pablo Hernandez. And everyone knows what he did on the ball and his
Mhm.
decision making. You're talking about decision making and playing that crucial ball at the right time and everything like that. But
Yeah.
it was his presence around the field. It was his leadership skills. And as I said, he made those young kids listen. You're up here now because a lot of these young kids now get drafted up from the 21s,
Mm.
and they are allowed train now with the first team. So he kind of says, listen, you're in with the big boys now. We're preparing for the Premier League, best league in the world. You've got to be on your game. You
Yeah.
can't be slacking anyway. And little things like that. I think we just missed that type of player now at the club, at Pablo Hernandez.
Yeah, it's a bloody hard position to fill because it's number 10 is the creative source. And
Yeah.
if you could develop any player into that, every single club would have one and they'd have a replacement every season if they were
Mm,
left. And they don't. And that's the thing. It's such a specialized position. And I think what people forget about Pablo is Pablo's career wasn't always what it was at Leeds. Like he struggled at times as well. When he came
yeah.
into Valencia at start, he'd been around a bit. Like, he had several loans before he ever got into the Valencia team. And then,
Mm,
he went to Swansea. He was okay at Swansea. People weren't talking about him the way we speak about him when he was at Swansea, and he did okay there. And then he went off to Saudi for a bit and then came back to Leeds and was an absolute superstar for Leeds. So if you're looking at someone like Brendan Aronson at 22 years of age and you're judging the final product on him now, if you did it to Pablo Hernandez back in the day, you would never have taken him. So it's about give these kids time to develop and give them time to learn and grow, and
yeah.
they'll come good. But it's a
Well,
tough
if
ass.
if if you go back to even John Giles will say it, to the great Leeds side, the team that dominated European football, late 60s, early 70s. The one player, Eddie Gray will say it, probably Billy Bremner, God rest him, if he was here today, would say the one player that brought them to that level, that really pushed them on, and they learned so much, was Bobby Collins,
Mm,
another little man. And but Bobby would have been in his 30s. And I remember Don Revy. I actually got to know Don when he lived in Kinross, and I spoke to him regularly, would you believe, back then.
yeah.
And I remember him telling me he went down there to sign Bobby at Everton, and Bobby wasn't having it because that time Leeds were second division. But
Mm,
he was driving up the motorway M62, heading back to Yorkshire, and he decided, I'm not leaving Merseyside. I'm going back and I'm having another go. And he sat on the wall, and Bobby came back, and he seen him sitting at the wall, and he says, "You really must want me," he says. And he said that's what turned him. And people forget this. Bobby Collins was probably the biggest influence factor at Leeds United and our history, because from that side, this is where we are today. And you wouldn't have as many supporters in Ireland or all over the world because of what Don Revy and his team achieved.
absolutely.
But any of these players, if you talk to them today that's around, will say the biggest influence factor, the best decision Don Revy ever made was bringing
Bobby
in
Collins.
Bobby Collins.
And teams that have those moments where they go from being a good team to being a great
Yeah.
team, It can be
Yep.
that one signing, and it's
Yep.
sometimes it's an underwhelming signing. You look at a player and you go, "Well, he's not going to score loads of goals for you. He's
Mm.
not going to create lots of assists." But no, he'd run the midfield for you. He's the engine of the team, and he'll
Yep.
keep everything moving. And they're the kind of players I always say you don't always necessarily notice them in the team, but you notice them when they're not in the team. When you take them out, all of a sudden the team just doesn't look as good. It's not
Mm.
as cohesive. The ball doesn't move as well. And these players are a massive part of it. And Bobby Collins was always the one for me when I grew up. My dad talked a lot about
Mm.
Bobby Collins, but he used to always say the same thing. Giles and Bremner and Larmour and, Reaney and all these guys, great players. They were great players, but everyone kind of, Bobby Collins isn't talked about enough. And I think as time has gone on, Bobby Collins has kind of just slowly come back to the top where people are now going, yeah, that team wouldn't have been the same team without Bobby Collins, and it wouldn't have had the success that it had after, without somebody like Bobby Collins being there for the time that he was there. So these players are massive when they come in. And just to address something in the comments, not every person in Ireland is called Ger or Gerry. Gerard is a very common name in Ireland. So it's...
Well, it's funny. My name is called so many different versions of it all over. Down here in the west of Ireland, as you know, Ger is the Gaeltacht. Garrod is my Irish name. Gerry. And when I get over to England, depending on what part of either whether it's Lancashire, Yorkshire, and people call me all different types of things like Jezza, things like that. So I've been called all sorts of things. So don't worry about the Ger, the Gerry, or the Garrod, or Jezza.
I've had it as well. I never throw Garrod at anybody because a lot of people I work with are either American or English, so it goes over their head. But when I was in England, I got called Ger a lot because it's just not a usual name to correct people on. It's Ger. But yeah, Ger is a pretty common name.
Actually, my proper name and on my passport is Gerard. But and that's what my mum always called me. She hates.
That's when you're in trouble, Gerry.
Sorry.
That's when you're in trouble. Gerard gets
That's when I was in trouble.
When you're in trouble.
Gerard. Yeah. When I want something or go to the bank for a loan, I always use my name Gerard. Because I think it gets you a little bit more status.
It's a bit more serious, isn't it? It's a real name rather than that. Yeah, I grew up with 4 other Gers. My mother's called Geraldine, so she was called by her family. She was called Ger. My granddad his name was Timothy, but everyone called him Gerry because that was a second name. So he was Gerry, and I was named after him. So it's just there's lots of different versions here, and we're not all bald. So some of us have hair or had hair at one point. So yeah, that's that one out of the way. Gerry, there's been you've been in touch with me recently about prospects at the club. We've been seeing an awful lot. The Academy Dreams documentary came out about Leeds, really kind of opened up the academy and maybe didn't look at it as much. And we've been very lucky where we've had teams in UCO finals over the years. And nearly every generation's had one Leeds youth team that's either got to a final or been very close to it. And we've known of a few players coming through. But the current crop of Leeds, and one thing I would say, and I'll caveat this, I'm very critical of Victor Orta, full stop. However, what I've always said is he has an eye for a young player. And some of the young players that he's brought into the current under 21 side in order to make sure that they make that breakthrough have been great. But even further down, some of the scouting that's been done and using that data, as you spoke about, has brought in some fantastic players. And I wanted to speak a bit to you about this. You've mentioned a few players to me, and I'm not going to steal your thunder and mention them, but of the current group of young players coming through, you've mentioned a few that we should be keeping an eye on, future prospects for Leeds. Who are they and what age groups are they and what have you heard?
Well, I'll keep to a few because, as I spoke to you earlier, Jer, we have to be realistic. And if we get 3 or 4 through, that's a success story. We're not going to get 8, 9, 10. That doesn't happen, even at the best clubs in the world, even Barcelona, or Ajax, or some of these clubs who are reputedly the best academies in the world. They don't get that many through. So we all know about Archie Gray. But there's another kid that plays alongside Archie, same age, and they reckon he's as good as Archie and will be as good as Archie. Again, I'm only going on his ability. I don't know his personality. I don't know anything about the boy. Is a kid we signed in the summer from Cardiff City, Charlie Crew. So that's one to look out for. He's only again like Archie, turned 17. And he'll be pushing on for the 21s, who are phenomenal. I won't mention any of the 21s because most of your viewers watch the 21s and they know whichever ones they think is going to come through. Then below that, and we go back to the Greys again and the Grey dynasty. As good and all as Archie is, and Archie's going to be a phenomenal player. There's a better one. And I mean, I've already gone on record. I says the best striker in European football in 5 years from now will be from Yorkshire. but or will have been born in Yorkshire,
Yeah.
and it won't be Erling Haaland. I think it's going to be Harry Gray, and I know that's probably a hard thing to say on a podcast as popular as yours, Ger. And I don't want to put pressure on, but this kid is phenomenal, and he's only 14. He's the younger brother of Archie, but I mean, any kid that can bang in up to 100 goals a season, he's got to have it. And we think about this as well, and I don't know what your thoughts are on it. The academy have never really produced a top goal scoring
No.
striker. We've always had to buy them in. People will say Alan Smith, but was he
Wasn't a
really a
great goal
top goal
scorer
scorer?
though, was he?
No,
He scored
that's my
huge
point.
amounts of goals.
We're nearly have to go back to Peter Lorimer, would you believe,
Jeez,
that came through.
yeah.
The other one in Harry's age group is a phenomenal player, and this name will be on Leeds fans' lips in maybe 5, 6, 7 years from now. A kid called Finley Gorman, super player, runs the midfield, all the skills in the world. So they're really, I don't want to be going on and on with names.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
if you remember those few, obviously the two Greys, we'll all remember the Greys, Charlie Crew and Finley Gorman. I won't go in any others because
That's all right. There's loads.
if those
Rabbit
four
hole.
come through, that's a success story.
Well, it's four big ones that will come through in key positions as well as
Yeah.
striker and midfield are huge for us. Somebody's asking in the comments, how many Greys are there? How many great kids we got currently
Well,
in the club?
there's also another one coming through, but he's very young. He's only a baby. Yes, he's 10. Is Jacob. And actually, Harry and Archie are Andy's boys,
And these kids,
and
yeah.
Frank's grandsons.
Mm.
Eddie's grandsons are a little bit younger. So Jacob is actually Eddie's grandson. He's one to look out for. But I've spoken to a lot of people, and not just within Leeds, other clubs. And I've asked them because I'm based now in Galway. I don't get over to see that many academy games. But guys that go, and agents, I work with an agency as well. And I asked them, you have looked at these kids playing, and they all know these kids. This is Harry is just on a different level. But I reckon the one that's under the radar is this Finley Gorman. He's been one to watch for, and he's just getting better and better every season. They're both in the same age group, so they're the two. But Harry is going to be the one. The only thing is, we don't want to, and unfortunately, it's happening because of Archie and the name. The pressure is already on him, and he's still only. Remember one thing: he's only a 14-year-old kid. And we don't want to be putting too much pressure on them, you know?
Yeah, Michael, good point there on the policy on their order of buying new players, like of Joffrey Greenwood, Somerville, Pascal, Hielde, Bay, Tram, and then loaning. No, loaning's a huge. This rush of people. There's a group of people trying to get Leeds. You know, he's a great kid. He should be playing now. And it's like these kids need time to develop and make mistakes and learn from those mistakes. And what they don't need is a very, very, very loud and imposing Leeds United fan base on their shoulders. You know, when they make mistakes for Leeds. So it's something better off to go and learn elsewhere. Just two questions, Gerry, and I won't press you too much on this, but there's just two names been thrown in the chat, and I like to kind of answer as many questions as we can. One person, Dale, here is asking, do you know anything or any thoughts on Cian Coleman at the club? Have you heard anything about him? I know I've heard the name pop up a couple of times, but I haven't heard a huge amount of detail on the player.
Cian is a young lad from Yorkshire who's declared for the Republic of Ireland. He's actually sustained a very bad injury not so long ago, and is out for the rest of the season. And I just hope that doesn't set him back. I think Cian will have a decent career. And I don't want to be too judgmental. And as I said, always expect the unexpected in football. But I wouldn't really see Cian as, I mean, as I said to the question just before this, that they're all not going to come through at Leeds, and let's be fair. But I think Cian could have a decent career. I just don't see him being a Leeds United player if we're moving on and trying to win trophies in 2, 3, 4, 5 years from now. I just don't forget we'll be bringing in a lot of players from Europe as well, and younger players as well. So I think he'll do well, Cian, but I don't really see him at Premier League level. And I hope he's not listening to this. But that doesn't mean I'm right.
Motivation, Gerry, motivation.
Yeah, as I said, prove me wrong. That's what I would say to him if he was, or his mum was listening.
There usually is a surprise, though. There's usually a player pops up from somewhere who's either gone down the divisions and come back up through. I mean, look at Luke Ayling. Arsenal released Luke Ayling. He took
Yeah.
the long way around to get into the Premier League, but he
Well,
got there.
Gary Kelly came as
Gary
a
Kelly as well.
striker, and it was by luck in '93 that Wilco decided to give him a go at right back.
Yeah.
Melster, a
What
lot of
decision?
his luck as well. Mel had got injured and never played again after that. And so he just stuck in a young 19-year-old Irish kid. And look at the career Gary Kelly had after that.
I actually, there's a comment on screen. I'll get to that in a sec, but I actually saw Gary Kelly's debut because it was here. It was in a friendly against either Shelburne or a League of Ireland.
It was probably in Cork, wasn't it?
Possibly was. They were over here on a tour.
Yeah, they played the two games. They
seasons.
played midweek on Wednesday in Cork, and they played on the Friday night at Shelburne. You're right.
Yeah, I was there.
And yeah, it was down in Cork, and people were scratching their heads. And who's this?
There's a lot of people in Talca Park the same going. There was a kid wearing number 22 on the pitch, and like, who the hell is the young fella playing? And he's all right. He's not a bad player, is he? What a career he went on to have. Pretty much that season, he made himself the first choice fullback.
I'll be honest with you, and I think I told you this story earlier. Gary only wanted to play for Leeds, and it goes back to Eddie Beaglehole and the influence and also the environment and what Andy Wood is doing now, who Andy worked actually under Eddie Beaglehole, and he's doing the same thing. It's why kids love going to Leeds and love being in the environment at Thorpe Arch. But Gary actually went to Leeds initially on trial. Then Man City wanted him over. And as I said, he was going over as a striker with a guy called PJ O'Connell. And but anyway, the story being is that Gary rang back his manager, a guy called Paddy Hilliard, a great guy at Home Farm, and just says, Paddy, he says, there's only one club I want to play for is Leeds. I don't want to go on any more trials. Leeds is the club. And I think that attitude stuck with him all through his career. He was going to play anywhere, even if he had to play goalkeeper. He was going to play wherever the manager wanted him. And that day there was an opening. He got lucky. He went in at right back, and by God did he grab it. And look at the career he had after that. And as I said to you earlier, Ger, there's no doubt about it. In 94-95 season at international level as well as club level, Gary Kelly, in my opinion, was the best right back in the world. I don't think in that year there was a better right back anywhere. And he was still only a kid, 19, 20-year-olds, you know?
I always scratched my head when Leeds brought Danny Mills in. I always kind of scratched my head and went, boy, you just don't need him. Gary doesn't get injured that often. And still, even when Mills managed to get into the team in the Champions League run, still, every time Gary Kelly played, for me, he was a better player than Danny Mills. And up until he finished. And it was there's so few one club players around the place, and to have had one like Gary Kelly in a modern era of football is tough. I mean, I can only remember a handful of one club players. Steve Bull at Wolves was one that came to mind, but Gary Kelly was just, he's only up the road from me, and I've met him once. I met him once. He used to work in a retail store that he came into once, and one of the lads that worked for me made a show of himself on it. So I didn't get a chance to talk to him, a pure embarrassment. But yeah, a player I'd love to speak to, a guy I'd love to get a chat to, because I think
an absolute lovely guy. Yeah. And I mean, I'm only going on what was seen off camera, but I remember he came to one of our functions when I ran the supporters club, and back then in the 90s, we used to have regular get-togethers with all the supporters from Ireland in the executive suite at Ellen Road. And Gary, you go to Gary and says, we're over and we're have a do on that night in the executive suite, and he'd have about 6 or 7 players there, and no one else could. They were all scratching their heads and said, how do you get so many players to your dues? It was Gary Kelly. But the first time he arrived in, very, very quiet, shy 19-year-old, first thing we did is brought his shirt. He just had class all over him. He brought a lot of players come and they might do an hour, and you'd see them watching the exit door, wanting to get away.
Yeah,
you know. But Gary, no, he stayed with us all night. He sat down, spoke to everyone. But that was my first impression of Gary. He just came with a shirt. And but one thing that just came into my head, and we're talking
Mm.
about managers, and one of the great stories, going a little bit off the subject of academy, but the
Okay.
man who actually created the academy at
Welcome.
Leeds and set the tone for the success story in English football today, in my opinion, Howard Wilkinson.
Yeah.
But I remember once writing to Howard Wilkinson and saying we had a group over from Ireland, and we were attending a game, Sheffield United 4-3, Leeds won. And was the year we won the league, actually. And he's preparing for a big Yorkshire derby against Sheffield United. And I just asked him in the letter, this would have been a month before the game, any chance we could have a tour of the ground for some of our members.
Mm.
And so we all arrived up at the tour of the ground, thinking that somebody will come in a suit and do it. And next minute, Howard Wilkinson appeared, and he was standing there a few minutes, and we were talking to him, not realizing what was going to happen.
Yeah.
And we're just saying, like, we're just waiting, Howard, for a tour. He says, "Yeah, I know, I'm your tour guide." And that was, he actually done it up to 2:00, and he was so laid back. And one of the guys said, "Are you not on an age? Like, it's 2:00." He brought us out, and just as he brought us out to say goodbye and enjoy the game, and Sheffield United players had arrived on the coach, and they were walking in, and he knew them all because he's from Sheffield.
He's from Sheffield, yeah.
And one of the lads says, "Do you think you'll win today?" And he says, "Yeah, I've just looked at that team." He says, "We'll definitely win." We were 4-1 up. We nearly blew it again. No more than last
Leeds,
Saturday.
like, yeah.
We went to 4-3, but we still won it. I never felt such confidence. He was sure when he looked at that Sheffield United team coming off the bus, his team were going to win it that day. Remember Eddie Gray used to say the same thing. He used to look around the dressing room and look at the players and say, I knew we were going to win. I didn't even have to think about it. I knew, looking at those players, the opposition wouldn't have anything near our players, No.
It's brilliant. Sorry, I agree. I should say this. I'm a big fan of Howard Wilkinson. And I'm one of the people that believe that if Thorpe Arch is going to be renamed after anybody, it should be renamed after Howard Wilkinson. It's his brainchild and his baby, so it should go to the man. I know that things didn't finish well at Leeds for Howard Wilkinson, but I think it's a massive shame of all the people that have been remembered and honoured at Leeds that he seems to have been forgotten about by Leeds. And it's a real shame because, he is the last English manager to win the top division. He is the last Leeds manager to win a top division as well. And
last Leeds manager to win a trophy. And he also took us to Wembley in '96. Okay, it didn't go well against Villa. But I mean, what would we do now for a trip to Wembley or to a cup final? Doesn't matter, he did it. Give fans great moments, brought in some top strikers. I mean, he came across Yeboah. I remember it when we signed Yeboah in '95, and people were saying, "Who the hell is this guy? And what's he going to do for us?" Think about that.
Found that out, didn't we? There was the Yeboah thing was very funny. It was I remember at the time I was obsessed with Yeboah as a kid, and there was a video that Leeds put out about Yeboah, and it was just a very 1990s, early 90s kind of video with loads of music over the back of it. But there was a line in it where Yeboah said, "I don't train well, so I don't look like I train well, but I train for the game. I'm all about the game." And then when George Graham took over and he was getting rid of Yeboah, one of the things he said was he doesn't put it in training. And it's like there's a video there where he says that's just the kind of person that he is, but that's not his character.
If you go through the top 5 goals that Leeds United have ever scored, Tony Yeboah will be in at least twice. Will be in that top 5. I mean, if you ever wanted to promote Leeds United to somebody in Siberia or South America, it's just show those 2 goals, those goals against Wimbledon and that
Monaco.
Goal
the hat-trick against Monaco
Liverpool.
As well was won the goal against Monaco.
There was some cracker. I remember a goal against Sheffield Wednesday. The 3 goals he scored against Monaco. I mean, he was phenomenal. Was Tony Yeboah. He came to Leeds in '95 and from Eintracht Frankfurt. And the guy that was in charge at the club that time was Jupp Heynckes, who went on to have great success afterwards with Real Madrid and Bayern Munich and other clubs. And he says to this day, that was a mistake. But it's like anything. It's like Matt Busby saying the big mistake he ever made was letting Giles go to Man United. But we have had the other situation. Was Cantona the biggest mistake we ever, So it works in football. It's all about decisions, and not every decision is going to be right. And the one thing in about football and life in general, we're all going to make mistakes because we're
Of
all
course.
human. We're not machines. We're not programmed to get it right all the time. And that's another thing. When you're watching a young player or any player playing in a white shirt, remember he's done very well to have that white shirt and play at Ellen Road. And
Correct.
number two, he's a human being, and there's no guarantee he's going to have a great game. So when he makes mistakes, it's what humans do, make mistakes. And look at the good things he does. And another one that I know, Jack Harrison, and I know he can be frustrating at
Frustrating.
times, but
Yeah.
you look at the goals returns and the opportunities. I mean, you even go back to the game last Saturday. Obviously, he scored a
Great game.
first goal, but
Great game.
that
Yeah.
final goal, which was important, or sorry, the third goal, that was
Mm.
so important,
Yeah.
was his ball he put
Was.
across, and he does create opportunities. I know he loses the ball that much, but someone done a stat, and we're talking about young players and developing skills and the
Mm.
dribbling skills, which I think is an art that's gone out of football
Really is.
now.
Yeah.
There's not many great dribblers in the game now. I'm sure if you had to name 10 great dribblers in world football today, you'd struggle. But I remember someone came up with a stat, and it's it going back to this stats again. And they said the player in world football, this was a number of years ago, about 5, 6 years, that loses the ball most in a game is Lionel Messi.
Yeah.
And people say, why is that? It's because he's on the ball most, and he dribbles most. So he's taking more risks than any other player. So the
Yeah.
safe player will always play the ball off and play that 5 yard pass or 10 yard pass. So sometimes you have to give credit, and it goes
Yeah.
back to the word courage. Is players who
I was gonna
continue,
say.
like Crescencio Somerville, who'll take players on. He's not going to go by them all the time, and
No.
these are up against good defenders. So give him the plaudits for having the courage to go at players
Mm.
and take players on. It's something we all love. We all loved Eddie Gray, but Eddie
Yeah.
Gray didn't get by players all the time. We love
No.
players that take players on, and we should encourage that, not be slaughtering them when they lose the ball. Remember, and I think we said this earlier, Ger,
Yeah.
when we we're chatting, association football is a different team game than any other game in the world. One score can win a game. It doesn't happen in any other sport, in Irish Gaelic football or hurling or rugby or
Yeah.
basketball.
Field hockey around those
And
kind of
and
sports.
and
Yeah.
it could be that little bit of magic where a player
Yeah.
gets by a player, gets to the byline or gets into the box and lays it off, like Nanto did the last day for Harrison. And
Yeah.
that set us going. That early goal set the tone. If we
Does
hadn't
it?
scored that goal in the first 5, 6 minutes,
Yeah.
the game could have been totally different. People
Very
forget
different.
that. It's how
Yeah.
it changes games, you know?
I do give Jackie a bit of stick, and I have to put my hand up and say I
Mm,
am one of the people that gives him a bit of stick. But what I will say is the word frustration comes out because you know
mm.
how good he can be. That's
Yeah.
why it's there. And I think knowing that these players have this ability, you kind of want to, when you see it enough, you want to see it more. And then when you don't see it more, you kind of go, well, But there's no doubt. There's no doubt. As you said, the dribbling is a dying art, and we are lucky
Mm,
right now to have a couple of players in our club that can run at people and can dribble the ball well.
yeah.
Decision making and stuff, that's a different question, but they're very good at running with the ball.
Mm.
Gerry, we're getting near time. I just want to run past it. This is another question that came up about Ben Andrucci, another name that's popped up an awful lot this season at younger ages. What's your familiarity, or do you know anything about Ben?
I'm going to be a little bit controversial. From what I gather, he could be leaving the club in the summer.
Really?
He hasn't committed himself beyond this year. And don't forget the other thing, the influences on young players now. And even though I work as one myself, there's good and bad agents, and I think his agent will be looking to get him away. That's
Okay.
my personal opinion, and
Sure.
because if you look at him, he's a striker, a very good striker. I rate him. I don't know whether he's Premier League level or will get to Premier League level,
Mm.
but at the moment, you look at what's ahead of him: Sonny Perkins, Mateo Joseph,
Yeah.
Bamford. There, you have the boy that came in
Joffy
from
as well. Playing around there as well.
Hoffenheim in Germany, and then you have Rodrigo. So you have five, and I'll be honest about it, I have a funny feeling. I don't know what you feel, but I think if we stay up, I think we'll sign another striker. I think
I
that's on the
think it's
market.
already
So
been looked at.
yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah, I always say, and Eddie Gray, and you say this as well with young players. Yeah, it's great for their development, but young players have to play, and it gets to a stage when you're no longer young. So you get to 18, 19 years of age, you have to be in around the first team at that level. You look at our greats. I mean, you look at Alan Smith. I mean, he was 18. He was established at that age,
Right.
and so that's. I think he's probably been advised that there's five. When are you ever going to get your chance? And so I think myself, the boy will move in the summer. That's my own personal opinion.
Yeah.
It's just me saying that. It's not
Yeah.
anything coming from the club
Yeah.
or anything like that. It's just my opinion.
Personal
And
take.
quite
Yeah.
a number of, we have to remember, even with the 21s and the 18s and what looks like good prospects, they have to move on and look at their own career. I
Do, yeah.
remember having this conversation with Ollie Casey, who was a very good young centre back. And I said, Ollie, you're going to have to look at your own career. You have to be a bit selfish. And and now he's playing with Forest Green in League One, but he needed first team football. And he was one that went to Liam Cooper for advice. And Coops just said, you've got to an age now. You've played your 21s football. You've won trophies with the 21s. Bielsa played him in the team that got promotion, give him a couple of games there. He made his debut at Huddersfield just at Christmas time. But there comes a time when you have to get out of your comfort zone. You have to get in and play first team football. And I think Ben's agent is probably thinking that he might have to go down a division or two, but he probably could end up with a League One, League Two club. Initially, and then again he can come again. That has happened.
And that's not a bad thing either. You look at how many players we loan out to teams in League One and Champions League. Lewis Spade obviously was at Oxford this season, then League One. So it's not a bad thing to go and restart your career in League One. You've got a pretty short path back to the top if you make a name for yourself. So it's great. Gerry, just one last question. Philip has asked this here. Can we ask Gerry to compare the current crop to the crop that came through under David O'Leary?
Well, I was involved that time as a scout, so I'm going to be a little bit biased, but I think they were just a phenomenal bunch. You look at that group of young players that came through. I don't think that'll ever happen again in the history of our club. They were just phenomenal. I mean, look what they achieved: 2 European semi-finals when they matured and they were just cracking players. You can't deny that,
Yeah. Gerry, we're going to wrap up. There's a lot of comments I haven't get to. Some people saying some very nice things. There you go. There's one there. Top man, Gerry, taught respect. Mr. Leeds, you were called up here a second ago. I'll find that one again. There we are. Lots of nice things being said, Gerry. And I'm not going to get to all because there's just so many comments, but I'll try and take off a few. Joe Snowden was mentioned as well earlier on. I'm a big fan of Joe Snowden. I think he's going to be a cracking player. He's got a tough ask in the position he's playing in to break through, but a good kid. Gerry, thanks for doing this. We might do this again in the future if you're up for it.
It's a pleasure. And again, I'd like to compliment you on the tremendous show you're doing. And it's great for Irish fans and availing of technology and what technology can reach out and do nowadays. But you do a tremendous show, and compliments to you. And thank you for having me on.
Anytime, Gerry. Folks, thanks very much for dropping in today. A bonus stream this week. I didn't think there'd be a whole lot of news or anything to talk about this week. I was wrong. There's been loads. And it's great to have Gerry here. So again, we'll try and do this again in the future. But again, just to say a massive thanks to everyone who's watching and a big thanks to Gerry for dropping in. And we will see you soon back on Monday morning with the Leeds news. Nothing over the weekend, but I'll see you on Monday. So thanks for watching. See you then. Bye.
Good night. Yeah.